In the world of hip-hop, Sean Combs, better known as P Diddy, has long been a symbol of power, success, and controversy. But in 2024, a shocking investigation into his past would rock the entertainment world to its core. It wasn't just about fame or fortune. This time it was about murder, a case that linked P. Diddy to the death of one of pop culture's most iconic figures, Michael Jackson. The headlines read like a fever dream. Did P. Diddy have a hand in Michael Jackson's mysterious death? As law enforcement and journalists dug deeper into Jackson's sudden passing in 2009, an intricate web of power, fear, and control emerged. And at the center of it all was Sean Combs. What had once seemed like a tragic death of a troubled superstar soon began to take on the markings of something far more sinister. Michael Jackson's sudden death at his Los Angeles mansion on June 25, 2009, shocked the world. Officially, it was ruled a case of acute propofol intoxication, a powerful anesthetic administered by his personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray. But nearly 15 years later, new forensic evidence and a fresh round of witness testimony pointed to a darker reality: that Jackson's death wasn't just a tragic accident, it may have been orchestrated. The reopening of the investigation in 2023 was driven by newly surfaced documents and allegations. A former associate of P. Diddy, someone who had once been embedded deep within the hip-hop mogul's inner circle, came forward with explosive claims. The informant, known only as Mr. Black for his safety, claimed that Michael Jackson had become a liability for P. Diddy and his business empire. In new things Mr. Black revealed in a bombshell interview with investigative journalist Marisa Owens. Things that could ruin Diddy. It wasn't just about the music industry. There were deeper, darker dealings that went way beyond entertainment. This confession opened the floodgates. The investigative team, led by Detective Raymond Cole, a seasoned investigator in high-profile celebrity cases, was tasked with unraveling the tangled web of secrets, betrayal, and deadly consequences. Forensic experts revisited the toxicology reports from Jackson's autopsy, looking for signs of foul play that might have gone unnoticed. They found traces of sedatives that didn't align with Dr. Murray's prescriptions, raising the possibility of outside tampering. P. Diddy, a man who had spent decades building his empire, was no stranger to controversy. His name had been linked to multiple legal disputes, violent altercations, and rumored criminal activities over the years. But nothing had ever stuck until now. The investigation grew even more unsettling when detectives uncovered a secret meeting between P. Diddy and Dr. Murray just 2 months before Jackson's death. Phone records revealed a series of encrypted calls between the two men, stretching over the weeks leading up to the fateful day. According to Mr. Black, Jackson had recently rejected a lucrative deal with Combs that would have given him control over certain music rights. Jackson owned rights that were worth billions. Combs, infamous for his ruthless business tactics, saw Jackson's refusal as a declaration of war. In the hyper-competitive world of entertainment, control meant everything, and losing out on the rights to Jackson's catalog could have cost Diddy untold millions, even threatening the very foundation of his empire. But this was more than a business dispute. It was personal. Michael Jackson had humiliated Diddy during a private negotiation, calling him a second-rate hustler in front of several high-profile executives. The public never knew about the incident, but within industry circles the insult festered. For someone as powerful as P. Diddy, such slights couldn't be tolerated. The investigation into Michael Jackson's death was rapidly unraveling layers of mystery that had long been buried under official reports and media scrutiny. Detective Raymond Cole, known for his methodical approach and razor-sharp instincts, could sense something was off from the beginning. Jackson's death had always felt too convenient, especially for someone with as many enemies as Michael Jackson. The renewed focus on P. Diddy added a chilling new dimension. As Cole and his team dove into the encrypted calls between P. Diddy and Dr. Conrad Murray, they also began pulling records of Jackson's final days. It was then they uncovered another unsettling clue, a large transfer of funds from one of Diddy's holding companies to a shadowy shell corporation, which appeared to have ties to Murray's offshore accounts. Find the timing of the transaction? Less than 48 hours before Jackson's death. This new financial lead painted a grim picture, one of potential murder for hire. The team needed to verify this theory, but the deeper they dug into Murray's finances, the more obfuscated the trail became. Each holding company they traced led to another shell corporation, often headquartered in countries with strict banking secrecy laws. It was a financial labyrinth that seemed almost impossible to penetrate. But Detective Cole was relentless. With the help of forensic accountants and data analysts, the team began to notice patterns, subtle, but there. It became clear that Dr. Murray had been paid significantly more than the public had been led to believe. This was no ordinary physician-patient relationship. The payment from the shadowy corporation tied to Diddy was a staggering $5 million, far beyond the scope of medical services. The implication: this was hush money, or worse, blood money. As the investigation gathered momentum, Marisa Owens, the journalist who had first broken the news of the reopened case, found herself in a dangerous position. Anonymous threats flooded her inbox. Strange cars began to follow her as she left work. Although despite these warnings, Owens remained undeterred. She knew she was onto something explosive, something that could bring down one of the most powerful figures in entertainment history. Meanwhile, Cole's team began to identify witnesses who had been too scared to speak in the original investigation. One of them was a former bodyguard for Diddy, a man known only by his alias. C was a towering figure, hardened by years of working in the shadows of the music industry's most notorious players. He had seen things that few dared to talk about: secret meetings, bribes, and threats. And now, for the first time, he was ready to talk. Diddy wasn't happy with how things were going, C said, lighting a cigarette in the dimly lit interview room. His voice was gravelly, as though the weight of years had worn him down. He always wanted to control everything. Jackson, he was a threat, not just because of the music rights, but because he knew things that could destroy Combs' empire. What kind of things? Cole pressed, leaning forward. He exhaled a cloud of smoke. Jackson had information on how Diddy was moving money. Offshore accounts, tax evasion, and even some under-the-table deals with cartels to launder cash. It wasn't just about music, this was criminal enterprise. If Jackson had talked, Combs would have gone down for good. This revelation shifted the investigation into high gear. Suddenly, Jackson's death wasn't just about financial disputes or personal grudges. It was tied to a sprawling criminal network that implicated not only P. Diddy but potentially other high-profile figures in entertainment, finance, and even organized crime. The bodyguard's testimony cracked open a world that had long been hidden from public view. P. Diddy had cultivated an image of a suave, successful mogul, but behind the scenes he was operating more like a mob boss, pulling strings and silencing enemies as he expanded his empire. Jackson, with his deteriorating health and erratic behavior, had become a loose end, one that needed to be tied up. As Cole and his team cross-referenced C's claims with financial records, they found chilling corroborations. Diddy had been funneling money into various projects across Central America, purportedly to support emerging talent and cultural exchanges. But in reality, these ventures were fronts, hiding drug money from Mexican cartels. And Michael Jackson, known for his philanthropic work and vast network of global contacts, had found out. He had threatened to expose it all during a conversation with Combs in early 2009. For Diddy, that was the final straw. What followed was a carefully orchestrated plan. The team discovered that Diddy had used intermediaries to make contact with Murray months before Jackson's death, grooming him for the role of fall guy. Murray had no idea just how deep he was getting involved. To him, it seemed like a lucrative opportunity: private care for one of the most famous men on the planet, with millions on the table. But behind the scenes, Combs was pulling the strings. They all knew they were getting close, but they still needed hard evidence that could tie Combs directly to the plot. They needed proof that the payment to Murray wasn't just for medical services, it was for murder. Their break came when they tracked down a series of encrypted text messages between Murray and one of Combs' attorneys. These messages had been deleted from Murray's phone, but forensic specialists were able to recover fragments from his cloud backups. The texts painted a damning picture. "Make sure it's done right," one message read. "This is bigger than both of us. He can't talk. Ever." Another text, sent the night before Jackson's death, was even more chilling. "This ends tomorrow. Payment will be processed by morning." It was the smoking gun they needed. With this new evidence, Cole's team moved quickly to secure a warrant for Combs' arrest. But they weren't the only ones closing in. Word of the investigation had leaked, and Combs had powerful allies. As the net tightened, P. Diddy's legal team mobilized, launching a counter-offensive to discredit the investigation and sow doubt in the public's mind. Media outlets sympathetic to Diddy began running stories that framed the entire case as a conspiracy and elaborate plot to bring down a black billionaire. But the walls were closing in. The evidence was too strong, and public opinion began to shift. What had once seemed like a far-fetched theory now felt chillingly plausible. How else could Jackson's death, so abrupt and shrouded in confusion, make sense? As the day of reckoning approached, Diddy's team knew they couldn't stall the inevitable. Rumors began circulating that Combs was preparing to flee the country, using his extensive offshore connections to disappear before law enforcement could catch him. As pressure mounted on P. Diddy, whispers of his imminent arrest began to circulate within the entertainment world and beyond. The public, once dazzled by the glitz and glamour surrounding him, now found itself enthralled by the dark and sinister undercurrents of this unfolding scandal. Journalists, private investigators, and fans alike began piecing together the fragments of Diddy's empire, one built not just on talent and business savvy, but on manipulation, fear, and, it seemed, cold-blooded murder. Detective Raymond Cole's team wasn't the only one closing in on Combs. Powerful figures in the government and law enforcement, some of whom had long harbored suspicions about Diddy's connections to organized crime, now had the opportunity to finally bring him down. Cole's team prepared for the arrest, aware that this case was far bigger than a celebrity takedown. It was a direct blow to a criminal empire stretching across international borders. Diddy was prepared. He had built a fortress around himself, both literal and metaphorical, over decades. His inner circle was fiercely loyal, paid handsomely to remain silent, and, in some cases, to do whatever was necessary to protect their boss. But his legal team, comprised of some of the most expensive attorneys in the world, launched a full-scale media blitz, framing Diddy as the victim of a smear campaign, painting Michael Jackson's death as a tragic accident, nothing more. They pointed to Dr. Conrad Murray's trial as the final word on the matter, claiming that all the evidence had been laid bare years ago, and that reopening the case was a desperate attempt to tarnish the reputation of a black billionaire. But Detective Cole was unmoved by the media circus. He knew he was closing in on something monumental, something that had the potential to change the way the public viewed not just P. Diddy, but the entire entertainment industry. With each passing day, the case became more complex, more dangerous. One of the key breakthroughs came from an unlikely source. A former member of Diddy's security team, who had remained silent for years, suddenly reached out to Cole's team. His name was Marcus Daniels, a man whose imposing physical presence belied a haunted, conflicted soul. Daniels had been a bodyguard for Diddy during the height of his career, and for years had turned a blind eye to the mogul's questionable dealings. But something about the death of Michael Jackson had stuck with him. "I knew something was wrong that day," Daniels told Cole during a tense interview. His voice was low, gravelly, weighed down by guilt. "I was with Diddy the day Jackson died. I didn't know what was going down, but I overheard enough. enough to know he wanted Jackson gone. Daniels recounted how Diddy had become increasingly paranoid in the months leading up to Jackson's death. The music rights dispute, while a significant financial motivator, was only part of the equation. Diddy had become convinced that Jackson knew too much about his offshore dealings and cartel connections, information that could destroy everything he'd built. I saw the way he looked, how he talked about Jackson. Daniels continued. It wasn't just business, it was personal. He felt disrespected, threatened. Jackson was in his way. Cole listened intently as Daniels laid out the events leading up to Jackson's death. Daniels claimed he had been instructed to drive Diddy to a private meeting with Dr. Murray 2 weeks before Jackson's death. It wasn't uncommon for Diddy to conduct secretive business meetings, but Daniels remembered the tension in the air that day, the way Diddy's voice lowered to a near whisper when discussing Jackson. He recalled hearing something chilling as he stood outside the meeting room, acting as a lookout, make sure it's clean. No mess. It was Daniels' testimony that filled in the final pieces of the puzzle. Diddy had orchestrated the murder, manipulating Murray into delivering the fatal dose, ensuring Jackson would never be able to expose his secrets. With Daniels' statement on record, Cole knew they finally had enough to take down Combs. The DA's office was fully on board, and plans for the arrest were in motion. But nothing was ever that simple with a man like Diddy. As Cole prepared his team for the operation, the stakes suddenly escalated. Marisa Owens, the journalist who had first broken the story, had been attacked. Late one night, as she returned to her apartment, 2 masked men had ambushed her in the parking garage. She was left with a broken arm and a chilling message: "Stop digging, or it's your life next." Owens refused to back down, but the attack sent shockwaves through the investigative team. They knew Diddy's reach extended far beyond his inner circle, and he had access to dangerous people who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone standing in his way. While the attack on Owens confirmed their worst fears, Diddy was aware of how close they were getting, and he was ready to fight back with everything he had. The night before the planned arrest, Cole received an anonymous tip P. Diddy was preparing to flee the country. His private jet had been fueled and was sitting on standby at a private airfield just outside of Los Angeles. Cole's heart raced as he realized they had less time than they thought. If Diddy escaped, he would disappear into the web of offshore accounts and international hideouts he'd spent decades building. They had to move now. Cole rallied his team. The DA expedited the warrant, and within hours the operation was set in motion. SWAT teams, along with Cole's investigative unit, descended on Diddy's Beverly Hills mansion in the early hours of the morning, just before dawn. It was a mansion, a sprawling estate surrounded by high walls and state-of-the-art security, had long been a symbol of Diddy's untouchable status. But this time, no amount of security could protect him. As the team breached the gates, Cole led the charge. They moved swiftly, efficiently, clearing room after room. The tension was palpable. Everyone knew this could go south in a second. Diddy's security personnel were well trained, and they expected resistance. It wasn't until they reached the upper floors that they found him, Sean Combs, standing calmly in his study, dressed in an immaculate tailored suit, as though he had been expecting them. There was no panic, no attempt to escape. He simply stared at Cole with cold, calculating eyes. "You're making a big mistake," Detective Diddy said, his voice steady, almost amused. "This won't stick. You think you've got me, but I've already won. The world will believe me, not you." Cole said nothing. He watched as Diddy's wrists were handcuffed behind his back, the mogul's unshakable confidence never wavering. As they led him out of the mansion, the media frenzy had already begun. Cameras flashed, reporters screamed for answers, and the world held its breath as the entertainment titan was escorted into a waiting police car. In the weeks that followed, the case against P. Diddy unfolded like a slow-motion car crash, captivating the global audience. As more evidence came to light, financial records, witness testimonies, and damning encrypted messages, public opinion began to shift. What had once been dismissed as a far-fetched conspiracy theory was now an undeniable reality. Michael Jackson's death had been orchestrated, and Diddy was at the center of it all. The trial was set to be one of the most high-profile events in modern legal history. But even as Diddy's empire crumbled, his influence remained formidable. His legal team launched an aggressive defense, framing the case as a witch hunt orchestrated by jealous rivals and overzealous investigators. They pointed to Jackson's history of drug abuse, claiming his death had been inevitable, and that Diddy's involvement was nothing more than coincidence. But Cole knew the truth. The web of lies, the financial manipulation, the cold-blooded plotting, it was all there, laid bare for the world to see. As the trial date loomed, the tension in the air was electric. Everyone knew this case would change everything. The day of reckoning had come, and the world watched as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. As the trial of P. Diddy approached, anticipation reached a fever pitch. The media circus surrounding the case was relentless, with reporters camping outside the courthouse and television analysts dissecting every new piece of evidence. The world had never seen a case quite like this, where one of the entertainment industry's most powerful figures was accused of orchestrating the murder of the king of pop. The trial promised to be a spectacle, with lives and legacies hanging in the balance. Inside the courtroom, tension was palpable as the prosecution prepared to lay out their case. Detective Raymond Cole, the man who had worked tirelessly to bring P. Diddy to justice, sat quietly in the front row, his mind replaying the events that had led them all to this moment. He knew the stakes were impossibly high. With the backing of an elite legal team, Diddy wasn't just fighting for his freedom, he was fighting to protect an empire that had taken decades to build. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Carla Winters, was prepared to present a mountain of evidence. Witnesses like Marcus Daniels, the bodyguard who had broken his silence, and Dr. Conrad Murray, now fully cooperating with investigators, would be key. Behind the financial records, showing the massive payments to Murray just days before Jackson's death, the recovered text messages instructing Murray to make sure it's clean, and the encrypted phone calls would all be presented before the jury. From the outset, the defense team attempted to frame the case as a narrative of jealousy, greed, and ambition. They claimed that P. Diddy was being targeted because of his status, wealth, and influence, painting Jackson's death as the unfortunate result of an addict's own missteps rather than any orchestrated plot. They also highlighted Dr. Murray's previous conviction for involuntary manslaughter, casting doubt on his credibility as a witness. The defense's argument was simple: Michael Jackson's death was a tragedy, but it wasn't murder, and it certainly wasn't Sean Combs' doing. For weeks, the trial unfolded like a carefully choreographed drama. Daniels, the former bodyguard, was the first to take the stand. His testimony was riveting, detailing the shadowy world of intimidation, control, and violence that surrounded Diddy. He described overhearing conversations between Diddy and Murray, where Jackson's fate was sealed. He was scared, Daniels recalled. He knew too much, and that made him dangerous. Diddy didn't trust him anymore. Next, the prosecution brought in forensic experts who had analyzed the financial trails. They explained how millions of dollars had moved through a complex web of offshore accounts, ultimately landing in Murray's possession. They also showed how the timing of these transactions aligned suspiciously with Jackson's death. The jury listened, wide-eyed, as the intricate financial machinations were laid bare. Then came Dr. Murray. His testimony was both heartbreaking and damning. He admitted to administering the drugs that killed Jackson, but insisted he had done so under immense pressure from Combs. "I was in too deep," Murray said, his voice shaky, but he made it clear that if I didn't do what I was told, my life would be ruined. When pressed for details, Murray confessed that Diddy had orchestrated everything, pulling the strings to ensure Jackson would never talk. The prosecution's case was airtight, but the defense fought back viciously. They cross-examined each witness with surgical precision, trying to poke holes in their stories. If they painted Murray as a disgraced doctor trying to save himself, and Daniels as a disgruntled former employee looking for revenge. The defense attorneys argued that the prosecution's entire case was built on circumstantial evidence, theories, and speculation. But the most shocking moment came when P. Diddy himself took the stand. Dressed in a sharp suit, with his trademark confidence on full display, he looked every bit the mogul who had weathered countless storms. His testimony was a masterclass in deflection and denial. He described his relationship with Michael Jackson as cordial, even friendly. He acknowledged the financial disputes over music rights, but downplayed their significance. Michael and I had our differences, sure Diddy said, locking eyes with the jury, but I had nothing to do with his death. This whole thing is a witch hunt. For days, the courtroom was captivated by Diddy's performance. He seemed unflappable, a man who had navigated the brutal world of entertainment for decades without ever losing control. But as the cross-examination continued, cracks began to show. The prosecution hammered him on the encrypted messages, the offshore accounts, and his meetings with Dr. Murray. Slowly, methodically, Diddy's cool demeanor began to fray. The final blow came when the prosecution played a recording one that had been recovered from a private conversation Diddy had with a close associate just weeks after Jackson's death. In the audio, Diddy could be heard speaking in hushed tones about the need to clean up loose ends. And make sure no one else talks. The jury was riveted as the tape played, and Diddy's expression, once composed, hardened into something darker. After 6 weeks of explosive testimony, closing arguments were delivered. Ada Winters made an impassioned plea to the jury, urging them to see the case for what it was. This isn't just about Michael Jackson's death. It's about power, control, and a man who thought he could get away with anything, even murder. You've seen the evidence. You've heard the witnesses. It's time to hold Sean Combs accountable. The defense, in their final argument, continued to insist that there was no concrete proof linking Diddy directly to Jackson's death. They urged the jury to look beyond the media frenzy and focus on the facts or, as they argued, the lack of them. In this case is built on speculation, Diddy's lead attorney said. Sean Combs is an innocent man, being dragged through the mud because of his success. The jury deliberated for 4 long days, the world holding its breath as they reached a verdict. On the 5th day, the courtroom was packed as the foreman stood to deliver the decision. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Reporters outside frantically relayed the moment as millions around the world tuned in. On the count of first-degree murder, the foreman began. His voice steady, we find the defendant, Sean Combs. A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by an eruption of murmurs and shocked expressions. P. Diddy, the untouchable mogul who had once seemed invincible, sat expressionless as the verdict was read. His empire, built on years of success, was collapsing around him. The sentencing hearing was held weeks later, and the judge, after reviewing the case's gravity, delivered a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The decision was final. Sean Combs would spend the rest of his life in prison. Outside the courthouse, as the crowds dispersed, Marisa Owens stood by Detective Raymond Cole. They watched the scene unfold, both knowing this case would go down in history. Owens, her arm still healing from the attack, finally felt a sense of justice. Cole, who had spent months piecing together the truth, felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. There's always more to the story, Cole said quietly, reflecting on the layers of power, corruption, and greed that had led to this moment. But for once, Owens replied, we got to the bottom of it. As the dust settled, one thing became clear: no matter how powerful you were, no matter how far your reach extended, the truth had a way of surfacing. And for P. Diddy, that truth had cost him everything.